Good morning. Welcome to Mountain Vista Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Northwest Tucson. Welcome to those of you who are sitting here in our beautiful sanctuary, and welcome to those of you who are joining us remotely via Zoom. I'm going to ask that we all turn around and look at the camera and wave to the folks that are joining us from home, and hopefully they're waving back to us. Thank you. Wherever you are and whoever you are, we extend a very warm welcome to you. We are better and we are stronger because you are here with us. Together, we make a difference. Together, we share our challenges, our sorrows, and our joys. Together, we strive to be a beloved community. I'm Deborah Roberts, one of the PA leads here at MVUU. During the month of July, because we are between ministers, the responsibility for putting together the services has fallen to the pastoral associates. This service was organized by Robin Bausell, and she will be giving the homily today. Her topic is Pathways of Post-Traumatic Growth. She will draw from her own experiences of trauma as she explores this theme. We also welcome a new pastoral associate today, Summer Adi. Thank you. We are so pleased that she is going to be part of our team, and I'm going to teach her the secret handshake after the service today. Today, she will be drawing on her practice as a therapist and her own family experiences to talk about radical acceptance as a way of dealing with the challenges that life presents us. Thank you, Summer and Robin, in advance for sharing both your personal stories and your expertise. Last week, you got a glimpse into the life of several members and friends of this congregation, and many have commented on how deeply moving and how much you appreciated last week's service. You are in for more of the same today. Thanks also go out to our crack AV crew and to our musical director, Chris Tackett. Speaking of Chris, he is the organizer of next week's service. It's going to be a sort of the best of MVUU with lots of music, including Shakela, and that's always a treat when we get to listen to Shakela, our pandemic music director. Please note that this is a virtual service next week, so don't come here, okay? Please tune in via the link that will be in the newsletter on Friday, or if you don't get the newsletter, you can get the link on our website, mvuu.org. I also want to mention that July is Disability Pride Month. It was on July 26 in 1990 that George Herbert Walker Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a civil rights law and prohibits discrimination based on disability. During this month, we celebrate disabled persons embracing their disabilities as integral parts of who they are, reclaiming visibility in public and interacting fully with their disabilities out in the open, thus rejecting shame and discrimination. During this month, we accept and honor each person's uniqueness and embrace it as a natural and beautiful part of human diversity. Of course, many disabilities are not visible. In addition to physical disabilities, there are cognitive and emotional disabilities, and that is why our theme today is so important and so timely.
You are never alone. It is okay to be tired of change. It is okay to be tired of everything different. Okay to feel weary of resiliency and wholeness and learning and growth, and okay to yearn simply for rest. It's okay to be grouchy and unsatisfied, and all the ordinary human ways of being that we are. Let this morning be a reminder that you are loved. Let our time together soothe what is restless in you. May you be comforted in knowing that whatever you are feeling today and other days, you are not alone. You are never alone. Come, let us worship together.
think we're going to get a chalice today.
Live theater, it's always fun. There is a curious paradox that no one can explain. Who understands the reaping of the grain? Who understands why spring is born out of winter's laboring pain? Or why we all must die a bit before we grow again? I do not know the answer. I merely know it's true. I hurt them for this reason, and myself a little bit too. To be continued.
Between our divisions, I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With reach out to bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With reach out to voices and reach out to visions. With friends we could make and all of our visions. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk a little about radical acceptance. Radical acceptance means totally accepting something. It means not fighting the reality that things are the way they are. It doesn't mean that we have to like it. It doesn't mean that it's fair. It just means that we make a choice, a very active choice, to not stay stuck with a sense of injustice and anger. I'm going to share my experience of how I started practicing radical acceptance and how it helped me create meaning around a very painful relationship. In my early teens, we moved to upstate New York, where we reconnected to family that we hadn't seen in years. My grandparents, Jadot and Teta, my aunts and uncles and their family. Prior to this, my last memory of my grandmother, my Teta, was from years ago, which were filled with so much love. She had a reputation of being very good with small children and the elderly. Loving, nurturing, willing to play, and childlike in many ways. Getting to know her again, she was still loving, but I also grew to see her over time as manipulative, paranoid, willing to play hurtful games. What had changed? My family had several members who struggled with mental illness, my Teta being one of them. At least once a year, someone would have what we would call an episode, where symptoms came up and most often escalated to the point of hospitalization. Typically when that happened, my mother would be called. My mother was the one that everyone trusted. She was a parent to most of her sisters, and it took a toll on her, and watching her year after year be in this position, I became very angry and antagonistic towards some of my family, but mostly my Teta. As each grandchild became older, one of the things that would change was that my Teta would in turn become paranoid and hostile. She couldn't trust anyone who wasn't one of her children. I started studying counseling, trying to understand my family. My initial work made me realize the need for boundaries that I was trying to put in place. Of course, I tried to convince my mother of this information, and she disagreed. My mother would bring up wajib, the duty we have to elderly relatives. I had some rigidity around that time and just saw it as condoning negative behaviors. When my grandfather, my Jadot, was dying, I had a chance to see my Teta in a different light. She went from being paranoid to very caring, and for the last few months of his life, she was a caring and loving caretaker. She could allow herself to love someone who was dying. I started to notice and acknowledge the impact anger was having on me. It was so easy for me to get pulled into conflict. I realized I needed to figure out how to help myself, and yes, that while that anger did come from a very protective place, it wasn't helping. The work started with having to accept my family and that they were the way that they were. I had to learn to accept the reality and not get caught up in the emotional reaction to that reality. Understanding the reasons my teta was the way that she was helped. There are many paths in radical acceptance, and one of them is creating understanding and meaning. Learning that the pain has a cause allowed me to accept. My teta was born to a large family in Amar al-Husn, a Syrian village in the mountains that bordered Lebanon. When she was 5 years old, she was sent away from her family to be a servant. Her services were sold. We do know that she was sent back to her family around 11 years old because she was too hysterical, and her family married her off shortly after. By the time my grandmother met and married my jiddo, her first husband had long disappeared and left her and her son. Listening to the stories of my family, it seemed that while early on Teta was showing signs of her trauma, things didn't escalate until the civil war in Lebanon in the 70s. This probably was the thing that impacted all of my family, but in particular my teta. The first obvious signs of episodes started happening then. With trauma, we know that repeated exposure creates more possibility of developing mental illnesses. From the ACE studies, the Adverse Child Experiences, we know that there are 10 factors which, if experienced under the age of 18, will contribute significantly to developing chronic illnesses, both physical, behavioral, and mental. Starting to really understand my teta's experiences helped me to shift the narrative that she was a selfish, manipulative woman who was making the choice to be the way that she was, to someone who was deeply traumatized, and in some ways, many ways, a child herself. This helped me find the compassion I needed to start the path to acceptance. What I had seen as manipulative was a survival response. What I saw as insecure and jealous was coming from a place of fear, of losing the only relationships that mattered to her. The pain of this will never change. The trauma has impacted several generations, but the active work of radical acceptance allows for less suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. And one more good morning. Oh, how nice of you. Earlier, I shared the Curious Paradox quote with you, which is from a musical called The Fantastics. And The Fantastics has always been one of my favorites and an impactful musical in my life. I think it often gets characterized somewhat mistakenly, in my opinion, as a lighthearted, silly, fun musical. It's a simple enough story about two foolishly infatuated young people, a boy and a girl, and their meddling fathers, who have been deadlocked in a faux family feud their entire lives in effort to secretly coerce their children into falling in love. Their thought being, if we tell them no, well, of course they'll do the opposite. So the fathers build a metaphorical and also a literal wall between their neighboring houses to manipulate their children into doing anything but staying away. When their plan seemingly works, and they believe their children to be sufficiently in love, they have to end the fight somehow so they can stop pretending and at long last combine their families into perfect, harmonious union. And how do they do that, you ask? Excellent question. By hiring a stranger to attempt to kidnap the girl, like you do, setting the boy up to be a hero who saves her. Now, attempting to further control their children's romantic lives and their futures, they invite what I have always interpreted to be the personification of chaos itself. Now, he classically appears as a tall, dark, charismatic figure dressed in black, and often wearing a red sash for a combination of utility, romance, and flair. A man known simply as El Gallo. So the fathers hire him to help them staging this wildly inappropriate opportunity for bravado and heroics, ultimately culminating in the perfect justification for them to tear down the wall and live happily ever after. Because that's how life works, right? We want something, so we try to force it into existence exactly the way we want it, regardless of how it affects others, whether it makes sense or not, and it becomes ours exactly as we asked for it, and everything works out perfectly. right? Yeah, no, not so much. And that's not how it worked out for the characters in the story either. They got what they thought was their happy ending, but that was just the end of Act 1. Act 2 opens with another lovely bit of prose delivered by our voice of chaos, who tells us the play is not done. Oh no, not quite. For life never ends in the moonlit night. And despite what pretty poets say, the night is only half the day. So we would like to fully finish what was foolishly begun, for the story is not ended and the play never done until all of us have been burned a bit and burnished by the sun. So the music starts to play, and one by one our characters, previously frozen in their happily ever after tableau, start to grow tired and hot and uncomfortable, and they start to pick and peck at each other, and it all unfolds into a big, angry, messy, not so fake anymore feud. The father's gardens are spilling into each other, and they're causing damage because the plants in each actually require completely different maintenance, something they didn't even bother to consider while they were busy plotting to trick their children into falling in love. Now, the children, who thought they were so romantically, perfectly, and fancifully in love, start to see flaws where they once thought they saw perfection. And having received everything they thought they ever wanted, are now faced with the reality that this may not be actually what they wanted at all. So as the stress of these circumstances and hasty decisions swirl in a whirlwind around them, so sets the stage once again for the entrance of chaos. Through a series of mischief, misdirection, mayhem, and servings of destruction at every turn, El Gallo teaches these four people some very tough lessons. He separates them. He sets them on their own paths. The boy is taken off into the wild world he thinks he's so prepared to tame, where he puts him through humiliating trials of the human spirit and physical pain. The fathers, feeling the cost of their actions, fearing for the futures of their children, now lost and heartbroken and more apart than ever before. He really puts them through it. Emotionally, physically, mentally. In the end, the boy is actually crawling on all fours as he returns home to find the girl, absolutely devastated, having had her own dalliance with El Gallo, who has toyed with her heart and vanished into the night, having stolen her most prized possession. Doesn't sound like a lighthearted, silly, fun story, does it? But Robin, I hear you saying telepathically, it all works out still somehow, doesn't it? They get their happy ending, and we all get to breathe a satisfying sigh of relief, right? Well, yes and no, but mostly no. But Robin, I hear you further asking, why would you do this to us? Why would you break the illusion of this fairy tale happiness? Are you trying to upset us? Well, yes and no, but mostly no. I think it's important that we sit with just a little discomfort and look at what really happened here. So the characters in the story do not get to keep their fairy tale happy ending. The happily ever after, as they attempted to plot for, remains shattered and destroyed. But there is something powerful in this, something I think is truly good. They have a chance to start again. And where there is a chance to start again, there's almost always hope. Sometimes you just have to shift your perspective. So the boy and the girl have had their blinders about life and love removed, things they learned from storybooks and fantasy but not experience. The rose-tinted glasses have come off, and each unrealistic expectation of how easy the world is to survive and how romantic and like a fairy tale love always is, has changed. They see each other's imperfections and freshly scarred over wounds, and they see themselves reflected there, seeing each other truly for the first time, and they are going to start again. This time, perhaps, though, maybe taking smaller steps, one at a time, maybe a little more carefully, with their newly learned lessons in tow. And the fathers, having learned the error of their manipulating ways, rebuild the wall, not for the sake of keeping them apart, and not just for the sake of keeping their individual gardens healthy, but also as a reminder that some obstacles are good. Some boundaries are important. And some things require time to work themselves out. We aren't left with the guarantee that these two families will forever be one, but we are left with some hope as they start again on better footing. And if their path is meant to end in union, it will, or it won't. But either way, they are now better equipped than they were before to figure it out. So the character of El Gallo is often seen simply as the villain in this story. Looking up close, it appears he does nothing but torture them, abuse them, mislead them, and puppet them. But I ask you to consider a different perspective. Sure, El Gallo enters as a man for hire who helps the scheming parents to traumatize their children. But take a very large step back with me and consider what I offered earlier as the interpretation for this character. Chaos was invited into their lives. Didn't it technically give them everything they asked for? Was it chaos's fault that the asks weren't more carefully thought through? And in the end, aren't they in fact better off and wiser than they were before? This, at its core, is a story of post-traumatic growth. Aha! At last, she arrives at the beginning of her point halfway through her presentation. Now, while I absolutely do not condone arranging a fake kidnapping or otherwise causing deliberate harm or trauma to anyone, I do understand the potential value of chaos existing in the universe. Chaos is neither good nor evil. Chaos, as an energetic force of nature, simply is. We, as people, decide its value, and we decide what we do with it, individually and collectively, often based on perspective. Chaos is unpredictability, uncertainty, instability, change. And change is traumatic. Sometimes just a little tiny bit of trauma, and sometimes absolutely life-altering. Sometimes change feels good immediately, and sometimes it feels like the end of everything. Regardless, change is trauma. Now, I want to take just a bit here, a moment, to turn our focus to each other. If we could get the gallery view up for just a moment. I want everyone to just be honest with yourself. By a show of hands, how many people in this room have been somewhere between a little bit and a whole lot of traumatized by chaos and change? So for those of you in Zoom who can't see, it's pretty much everyone in the room. Sit with that for a minute. Let that sink in. Now, we have a lot of different backgrounds, education levels, financial situations, gender identities, experience levels, etc. in this community. But we all share an understanding of what it's like to have chaos enter our lives, whether we invited it or not, and to have to face change, causing us to experience various levels of trauma, suffering, struggling, pain, chaos. It's a universal language. It's something built into the very fabric of life itself. So great. What do we do with that? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer, but I do have some ideas. Now, as for post-traumatic growth, traditional psychology only really sees two outcomes after a trauma occurs. You either succumb to it, or you bounce back. Now, bouncing back, or resilience, means returning to a level of functionality that existed before trauma occurred. Well, believe it or not, this actually used to be considered thriving. Newer psychology, however, and positive psychology, gives us another option. Instead of just bouncing back, we can grow and evolve from trauma. Now, a lot of people do this naturally, actually, but it isn't a guarantee that you will grow just because you faced trauma. Now, there are a few key factors that are likely to increase your chances to bounce back or grow and evolve out of trauma. Having a community of support, for example. It can be a family community, a friends group, a spiritual community in particular is especially helpful in this effort. Now, I can personally attest to that one. I can say without any hesitancy or uncertainty that this exact spiritual community has not only helped me through trauma, but has actually stopped me from succumbing to it, saving my life twice. And it is currently helping me to grow and evolve in ways that I never expected. Having the opportunity to hear other people share their stories and learn about others who have risen out of trauma is a very powerful tool in this effort, as is being able to share your own story with a community that supports you. Having positive coping strategies, developing more appreciation for life through gratitude practices, and strangely enough, having repeat traumas are all factors in one's favor for moving beyond resilience into growth. As I think most of you know, I lost my mother a few years ago, right before I found my way here to MVUU. At the time, that loss felt like the straw that broke the camel's back in a string of tragedies. I lost my brother when I was 16. He was 23 when he died in our house of a heroin overdose. My mother actually found him in his bedroom. Shortly after, my father's health took a significant downturn, and although they gave him about 6 months to live at the time, we made it through together 5 very difficult years of watching his body fail him, putting him through debilitating medical treatments, and an any day now panic response anytime the phone rang. I barely made it through the years after he passed. I was incredibly young myself and didn't really feel like I had too much bouncing back in between each of the tragedies striking. In early 2018, when I lost my mom, it came out of nowhere. She went from sounding a little down one Thursday afternoon to being wheeled in for emergency surgery that Saturday. I was by her side in the ICU 10 hours after I got that phone call. And I stayed with her through a few agonizing weeks of up and down health. And finally, after all the efforts she wanted to make had been exhausted, she decided she was ready to let go. I hated that decision. After she made it, while she was trying to rest through the night, I got dangerously sick from the shock of it. The nurses actually broke protocol to intervene so that I didn't end up in the hospital myself, and I'm grateful for them. But because they broke protocol, I won't name any names. The next day we raced to get my mother home. They told us she might not even make it through the transport, but we got her home. And I sat with her for 4 days, making her comfortable, talking to her when she was lucid, keeping her emotionally safe when she wasn't, and watching her journey back and forth between this world and something else entirely. I was playing her songs, painting her fingernails, and sitting by her side every moment with barely any sleep or taking much care of myself. Flying basically on adrenaline and the kindness of friends who dropped off food and sent well wishes. Losing her was brutal. I slipped into a very dark place after that. And MVUU, in fact, many of you personally sitting in this room right now and on Zoom, have helped me to find my footing forward. In that time of stumbling and fumbling my way forward, I performed cabarets, I sang about my pain, I laughed about the journey, and I cried about it. I found others who knew varying levels of what I'd been through, and I worked to pick myself up by the bootstraps and keep going. When the pandemic came, so came the news that the cancer had spread into my lungs. As a singer, I'm still struggling to find the humor in that one. And I can't say that I'm really enjoying this journey through losing my ability to breathe and having to adapt to the new ways my body works and doesn't. And now with the weird gift from the pandemic that I call radical self-quarantine, I have had a lot of time to sit and reflect on what the heck just happened, how the heck did I get here, who the heck even am I anymore, and when the heck did I turn 40, and what the heck am I supposed to do now? As a Jersey girl at heart, heck is not usually the word I use in that line of inner questioning, but we're gonna go with it for the sake of polite company. I have had to practice some radical acceptance of my own. I have had to accept that death is an unavoidable part of life. I have had to accept that chaos exists as a part of the natural order of the world. I have had to accept that I am not an exception to the rules, that I don't always have control, that I shouldn't always have control, and that not getting what I think I want may have actually been for my own good all along. In this powerful, albeit painful place of acceptance, I am gaining the perspective on this grief that almost destroyed me. Not everyone gets to choose. Not everyone gets to leave the world surrounded by love and light and peaceful music with delicate pink accent fingernails painted by their loving, doting daughters. My mother and I were given a gift in the pain and trauma of her passing. And we were given a true and miraculous blessing of being able to say goodbye, to tell each other how much we loved each other, to laugh a little, to nibble on chocolate cake, and be away from the haunting beeps and invasive tubes of machines and the sterile walls of a hospital. I have had to accept that it really could have been much worse. I foolishly spoke hateful words to my brother before he died, and they were my last to him. Because of that, I carefully worked through crafting better words to express myself and repair damages with my father before he died. I couldn't be with him the night that he died. I wanted to be. But the universe, in its sometimes obnoxious wisdom, knew I wasn't ready. So it put an obstacle in my way for my own safety. My father didn't want me to see him that way. I didn't understand at the time, but I do now. When it came time for my mother to pass, I had been through enough to be strong for her, and that was a gift. If I hadn't first been hurt, had chaos not previously intervened, I could not have given or received this gift. And I can now stand here today to share this story with you, not because I want you to be sad about it, quite the opposite. You are my community. And I am sharing with you a story of post-traumatic growth, a pathway that I have been walking through my trauma and pain, and into a place of acceptance, just now beginning to ease some of the suffering and setting me on a course to grow from here. My wish today is that this brings you even just a glimpse of light. It's an effort to give you hope. If you are now or are ever in darkness, pain, struggle, I'm hoping that just maybe you can entertain the idea that there is light on the other side of your hurt. And if you are willing, when you are ready, you may be able to find acceptance for what happened, ease a little of the pain, and to recognize your own strength, to allow yourself to receive the lessons and gifts that chaos might be trying to bring, and to remind you that you are not alone. Now, maybe our stories won't all be turned into misunderstood musicals, but we should share them anyway. And if we can work together to press in and find ways to keep sharing our stories with another, if we can help each other in our community to explore the pathways through trauma, whether we invited the chaos in or not, I'm certainly not promising a happily ever after, but I do think that we can find and create enough light for each of us to start over again and again and again. There is a curious paradox that no one can explain. Who understands the reaping of the grain? Who understands why spring is born out of winter's laboring pain, or why we all must die a bit before we grow again? I do not know the answer. I merely know it's true. I hurt them for that reason, and myself a little bit too. Thank you. And for the next few moments, we're going to listen to Chris play a little music for us. I invite you to meditate or sit quietly and think on your own experiences. Now, try not to take yourself too deep into any trauma, but allow yourself a moment to ask, is there perhaps some small amount of suffering that you could ease if you were to embrace a little radical acceptance? Is there a post-traumatic growth pathway that perhaps you're ready to start walking. Alternatively, if this is not an exercise for you, just take a few moments to breathe and enjoy a moment of calm and beautiful music.
flame is extinguished, but not our hope for the future, our courage in the face of crisis, or the love we share in all the world.
You didn't think you were getting out of here without a song, did you? As we stumble along on life's funny journey, as we stumble along into the blue, we look here and we look there, seeking answers anywhere, never sure of where to turn or what to do. Oy vey. Still we stumble our way through life's crazy labyrinth, barely knowing left from right or right from wrong. And the best that we can do is hope a bluebird will sing his song as we stumble along. It's a dismal little world in which we live. It can bore you till you've nothing left to give. 7 overrated wonders, 7 underwhelming seas, 6 excruciating continents, Antarctica. Oh, please. Still, you mustn't let it lick ya. This planet, oh so bland. Keep your eyeball on the highball in your hand as we stumble along across life's crowded dance floors. Excuse me, as we push and we shove, we live and we learn. And when we finally leave the bar and we see that morning star, we pull our bootstraps up and homeward turn.